I want to cover a few areas. So I just want to take you to the setting up of AUKUS, a very important initiative that's to your credit and to Scott Morrison's. Before your meeting with Joe Biden to get him over the line on AUKUS, you and Scott Morrison made the decision not to tell Emmanuel Macron about it. You didn't trust him?
Well, it wasn't quite like that. The trouble was, if you remember, everybody, I hope in Australia knows this, the background of this. This is a very important initiative because, from my point of view, it was a way that the UK and the United States could support Australia and to build a coalition of freedom-loving democracies that share our values and trust each other so implicitly and so intimately that we're willing to share very, very secret details of nuclear technology and other technologies. And that's what AUKUS is all about. It's all about the submarines. And so the problem was, as everybody knows, that the deal had been done between Australia and the French, for the French to supply some diesel submarines, and these were frankly too noisy. They weren't suitable for Australia's purposes, and they needed some vessels, some boats that were quieter, and they wanted nuclear propulsion. They came to us, and look, I mean, in order to give the technology to Australia, the UK clearly had to get the acquiescence of the United States, because the technology ultimately comes from the US, and the US is very vigilant in guarding those secrets. And so before we could go ahead and do the AUKUS deal, and before Australia could let Emmanuel Macron down, we had to make sure that we had our ducks in a row. We had to make sure that the Joe Biden, the President of the United States, was willing to share that technology, not just with the UK, but also with Australia. So that, you're quite right, that meant there was a period in which we were very worried that the deal would get out and Emmanuel would be furious, and a lot of paint would come off the plaster would come off the ceiling in the Élysée Palace, and he would jeter ses jouets dehors de la poussette, as we say in French. And manger le tapis, and so there was as I say, I should have mentioned it. As I say in this book Unleashed, there was a period.
Well, you were worried he'd try and kill off the deal before it was done. That's what you say in the book, and that he didn't like your dog either, Emmanuel Macron.
Well, I don't know. My dog unfortunately barked. During a moment of sort of Anglo-French solemn ceremony, I offered Emmanuel my dog to hold, but he mysteriously declined the honor of holding Dylan. But look, I mean, I don't want to trivialize this. The relationships between France and the UK, as with France and with the UK and Australia, are incredibly strong. And actually, there were many things where Emmanuel and I agreed. But the problem with AUKUS was it was really, it was for Scott. It was for Australia to let Emmanuel down. It wasn't my secret to share with him, as it were. It was something that Australia, needed to sort out. But I couldn't see any other way of organising it. So we had a slightly peculiar summit.
Boris Johnson, you were widely loved. You had wide popular support in Britain after Brexit. But during the COVID pandemic, you were widely criticised, not just for Partygate. If you had your time again, would you still have the full lockdowns, the bans on children going to schools, even playground, and the vaccine mandates?
It's such a brilliant question. And I guess everybody in Australia we all ask ourselves that now. But, and a lot of people now, with hindsight, say your lockdown was wrong. I go through a lot of the arguments, and I try to look at the evidence in Unleashed and to discuss it all. But you've really got to ask yourself, what would we do if we had another one? And we will get another one. And what would we do if this time the most vulnerable people weren't people who were in their 80s, but what if it was school kids? What would we really do to try to to stop transmission. And it is incredibly difficult. I think that it's very easy to say that lockdown was overdone and a mistake and that we should have done something else, but that is not how it felt at the time. But what I am particularly proud of, and really Brexit did help deliver this, is that the UK had the fastest vaccine rollout of any European country. And that was at least partly, largely because we had come out of the European Union's institutions and we licensed those vaccines, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, or the rest of them, 4 or 5 weeks, maybe more, before the 27 EU countries. And so that meant that by March 2021, we were way out in front. And indeed, as you will discover in this book, it was the cause of considerable frustration on the part of our European friends. But there are many things I would do differently, but I think that vaccine rollout was certainly one of the things I'm proudest of. And no doubt at all, Brexit, for all its critics, Brexit helped deliver it. Brexit, my friends, saved lives, and people may dispute that, but read this book and you'll see why.
You went to Israel after October 7 with Scott Morrison in a solidarity visit. In London, we saw tens of thousands of people take to the streets, pro-Palestinian marches that began before Israel's response had even started. There's been violence and aggression on the streets. Boris, what's gone wrong here? Is this partly an immigration failure, as some have suggested?
No, look, it's a terrible thing, which is that I was very proud to go with Scott to Israel to see what had happened. And look, the trouble is that in all our societies, whether it's Australia, whether it's the UK, whether it's the United States of America, there is a virus of anti-Semitism, the spores of which lurk beneath the floorboards, and it comes out. And, as soon as remember what happened on October the 7th, 1,200 people were massacred, tortured in appalling, innocent Jewish people. And what I find amazing now is that people can't focus on the reality that Israel is legitimately trying to prevent that type of massacre from happening again. And the people that did it, whether Hamas or others, they want to eradicate Israel entirely, and not just Israel, but every Jewish person in the world. And frankly, any democratic leader is entitled to try to protect his or her country from that sort of madness. And so, yeah, look, I'm firmly with Israel in their right to self-protection. And I wish everybody had a bit more moral clarity about this. And I agree with you completely. It was weird to see demonstrations the day after that massacre, effectively in favor of Hamas.
It's been absolutely terrible the world over, including in Australia, as you'll see when you get here in a couple of months' time. Look, Boris Johnson, we've covered a lot of ground: wars, foreign policy, politics. I want to ask you a final personal question, though. There is a great mystery about you, something so simple. How many children do you have?
I tell you, it's 8. It's 8 so far. Yeah.
So
8.
far, so there still might be others on the horizon.
I didn't say that. It's just 8. Which what I would say about that is, I'm being wrapped up. My handlers are telling me I've got to shut up. But I'll tell you, we do face a demographic deficit in the UK and many other Western countries as well. So I feel that in spite of the carbon footprint that I'm undoubtedly generating, I think it's a perfectly defensible thing to do.
Boris Johnson, thank you very much for your time. Great to speak with you.
Real pleasure. Lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you in a few weeks' time.
And as Boris Johnson just mentioned, he'll be in Australia shortly. If you want to see more of him, head to borisunleashed.com. You can book tickets for his Sydney event on Friday, the 6th of December, and in Melbourne on Saturday, the 7th of December. That's at borisunleashed.com. I like that line about a demographic deficit.